All right, we're going to jump in and take a couple of the photos that I took in my backyard here and turn them into actual tiling textures like this one right over here that you can then bring into Blender. Now you do not need to make them tiling before you bring them into Blender, but what will happen if you do is I have this same image just applied on here. It's just the image. There's no normal maps or roughness maps or anything to make it look a little more 3D looking. It's just the picture lying flat on the image as plain, like you can do, but that's all we're asking for. But I also have these arrays on here, so if you see, I can turn these off and, oh, wrong button there, turn them off in the monitor. And that's really just one tile here that I've just repeated over and over again by adding these two arrays. And they actually are pretty hard to see where the seam is. I don't think you really can see the seam. So not essential. You can bring in any kind of image and it does not need to be seamless. It does not even need to be a factor of 2. You can just drop it in. Blender's perfectly fine with that. But it'll work a lot better if you take these extra steps. And I want to show you how to make this tileable texture here. Along the way, hopefully you'll learn a lot of stuff with Photoshop. So this is the result that you just saw in Blender. But these are the original images that I took. Now this is not, well, first of all, it's not a square. You don't have to have it be a square in Blender, but most other tools will want it to be a factor of 2. So usually we just go with squares, but you can do 2 and 4, or 6 and 12 or whatever, as long as the one side is, 50% of the other side, or 1-to-1 like a square, you'll be fine. So again, nothing you actually have to mess with Blender, but it makes it a whole lot easier when you bring in your images as planes just to tile squares than to try to mess with a regular size shape. So we'll fix that right now. The first thing I'm going to do with this is, this image is really big, so the original raw photo that I took in with my camera. So I'm going to go up here to image and I'm going to go to image size. So there's image size and canvas size. The canvas sizes would crop the image down or give us more room, white space around the outside if we made it bigger. But what I actually want to do is change the size of the image because this is a lot more huge pixel size here, a lot more than I actually need. I'm just going to go ahead and make this 1,000. We're going to make this kind of light texture. It's not going to be hugely heavy. And then I've got this guy. If I deselect this little chain over here, which was already deselected in mine, you'll probably have to click that little chain. Now if I type 1,000 again, and then if I type 1,000 in here, I'm going to force it into being a square. And because it's just like these stone shapes or whatever, we're not going to really notice the distortion. Now you couldn't do that with somebody's face or something because that would make them look really strange. You can also resample here, let the computer do a little bit of the resampling so it doesn't look too pixelated. And then look how small it got in there. But if I zoom in here, it's still nice. This still pretty good high detail. If I zoom way in here, you can start seeing it break down a little bit. But that's okay because all we need is this, right? This is the exact same 1,001K image or whatever. Looks fine for what we're doing in our little, mock-up. Where am I at here? Photoshop. Okay. So there's this shape here, but it's not tileable yet. There's a couple of different ways for us to do that. One thing I'm going to do here before I do that, though, is I'm just going to clip over to my other image, and I'm just going to use the rectangle marquee tool. That's the M key for the keyboard shortcut. I'm just going to grab a chunk of the middle here. I know I don't want, the stuff down over here or the bushes up in there, so I'm just going to grab this little bit. Control C to copy, and I'm just going to close this one because I don't need it up there. But I'm going to come over here and say Control V, and I'm going to add that layer. Now it's huge, so the way I'm going to fix that is just back out with my scroll wheel here. Oh, and if your scroll wheel does not back out, let me just jump in here and show you where that is. That is under Preferences. That is under, let's see, I think it's Tools? It's in a weird spot over here. Yep, it's in Tools for some reason. You think it'd be on Interface, but it's not. Zoom with scroll wheel. So Preferences, Tools, Zoom with scroll wheel allows you to do that. I don't know why you wouldn't want that to be on, but for some reason it's not on by default. Okay, so Control T to transform. So Control T is transform, right? And then we're going to come over here and just grab this little corner. And then if you're in one of the more recent versions, it's going to automatically keep it square for you. If you don't want it to be, you can hold the Shift key down and free it up. And it's the reverse in older versions of Photoshop. Before the Creative Cloud versions, you have to hold the Shift key down to keep it square. So it's just the opposite. So I'm just going to do that. I'm going to double click to set that. I'm just going to go and hide that little layer. The only reason why I brought that over now is I might want to be able to sample a little bit of this material just for some variety, so I'm not copying from the same source over here. Also, I'm going to come down here to my background layer. I'm going to right click here and I'm just going to say layer from background. Not super essential, but it's just going to make a few other things easier. Just say okay. So I've got layer 1, which is hidden, by the way. I clicked on a little eyeball right there to hide that layer entirely, so it's on top of layer 0, but it's hidden. All right, the first thing we're going to do though, actually, you know, before I do anything else here, I think I drug out my Christmas tree along these paving stones. So I'm going to come over here and use the famous clone stamp tool over here. That's S for stamp. And I'm going to use a soft brush up here. You can use kind of any shape you want, but I'm just going to use a soft brush because I'm going to very gently kind of just get rid of a little bit of the crud in here. So the way the clone stamp tool works is you hold the Alt key down, and then you see how my cursor there changed. Hopefully you can see it in the recording software. It changed to a little target. And that's just going to show like where do you want the image to pick up from. And you notice I'm sampling all the layers right now. I'm going to go ahead and switch that to current layer just so I don't accidentally sample anything else there. And the aligned is checked, which means it'll keep this little offset there. So I'm going to click right here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint that area right onto the stone right over there to get rid of that piece of branch, Christmas tree branch or whatever that's there. And you can do that with anything. There's a little rock that's a little too bright, or there's a cigarette butt or something that, you know, in your photo, it's like, oh, this would be perfect. It wasn't for this big wad of chewing gum over here. You know, it's really easy just to kind of take out a few of those little, you know, distracting bits in here. I might just knock out that little leaf right there just because it's like really orange and it might stick out. We're going to get rid of some of the rest of this over here for now, but that's one way you can use the clone stamp tool. That's the, oh, this guy down over here. Yeah, let's definitely get rid of these big chunks of, and see, I'm going to go up here and resample. I'm going to bring that little edge down over here to this area. We'll do some more of that. Now, that's not perfect. You know, if I zoom in, it's a little bit of a flaw. I could be a little tidier with that, but that'll work for our purposes right now. So we cleaned up a little bit of the, you know, weird blemishes and things. Now let's go over here to, oh, actually, what I'm going to do now is save. It's a good idea when you're cropping and stuff like this. Just go ahead and save a copy. And I'm just going to save it as, well, anything. I'm just going to save it as, yeah, here. Just to save it so you're not messing with your original images. And then it's also going to make this next step a little bit easier as well. So I've got this now cropped down nicely to a square. You know, if you're not sure if it's a square here, you can always check your image settings, or if you grab the crop tool, you can also just come up over here and select 1-to-1 square. And that, you know, will allow you to just double click and you know for sure it's square, that it's not got a little extra pixels off on the side there. Not essential, but it, you know, makes it a little bit tidier. And then when you come in to do this next step here, filter, other, and then offset is what I'm after here. And what that's going to do is it's going to allow me to change these numbers over here to 500 by 500. So you can see that it's 500 by 500 because we made this a 1000 by 1000 pixel image. It's also why we saved it. Sometimes if you're cropping from a larger image, it doesn't work that way. You need to make sure that you've actually saved it back down, and it gets rid of all the extra details that it still has in its memory. So I'm going to go ahead and say OK on that. And what I've done now is I've just basically moved the image halfway up and halfway over. So this is like the top bottom edge of the image, and this is the right left side of the image. And now what I can do is use my other image over here to help me fill in there a little bit, or I can even just clone stamp a lot of this. So if I come in here with the patch tool. If you don't see this patch tool over here, the patch tool is a great tool to kind of start off with kind of like roughing in really quickly because it's very fast, but it may not be there unless you are in the photography mode. I like to work in the painting mode a lot too, but basically you kind of need to set up your own workspace in here that has all the tools that you want. You can create a new workspace, but by default, this little tool is in photography. Then you can switch over. I can switch over to the painting tools perfectly, no problem, and I can switch over to photography without hurting anything, and I don't have to save or anything like that. The way this tool works is it's kind of funky. It's just, again, it's using, you know, computer learning or whatever. I'm going to grab this little area here that's really problematic, and I've just drawn a little lasso. This is where I want to move the image to. So I'm just going to come over here and grab this little bit, and it's not going to be perfect, but you can see it kind of filled in that area really quickly. Quick and crude, but it did do it really fast just by kind of going over and just borrowing another part of the image. Now it is kind of trying to do a mix of the two, so you see it's a little darker than the source image. Maybe I'll just go up here. Yeah, see what it's trying to blend the two images together, which is actually a good thing. But this is a great way for you to kind of grab, like I could just sort of grab this area right over here. I'm just going to move this just down to that edge there. And you can see just by doing that, oh, Control D to deselect. Even just that alone, it got rid of that kind of razor sharp edge. You can do this anywhere you want. You can keep on coming over here and just saying like, I'm going to grab this area. And then you can look for an area that's kind of similar, like maybe over here, you know, like that one right there. And it's just basically the same exact thing that the clone stamp tool is doing, only it's sort of letting the computer do it for you. And in some ways it can be faster, especially for large areas like that. But what I can also do too is I can come over to this layer here and I can select on this, and I can use the clone stamp tool on this layer. So I can actually use the, let's grab this edge over here. I'll click Alt select over here, and then I'll go back down to this other layer. I'll hide that other layer. And then if I come over here and paint, you can see I'm actually painting with what's on the other layer. So you can see where that little cursor is. I'm getting this like much brighter green color on there. So you don't actually even have to clone stamp from the layer you're on. Actually, I'm going to undo that because that's not actually what I wanted to do. You can even do this from a separate window too. You can throw this into a different window and sample. Like I'm in a different document, so I can come over here and grab this guy, and I can come over to this document, and you can see, oh, I'm on the wrong layer. And I can now paint over here. And what I'm actually painting from is not from some other part of this document. I'm actually painting from this document over here. So it's a kind of a cool way that you can use to jump over different layers. What I think I'm going to do though in my other layer is this stone right here is really bugging me. So I'm going to come over here and turn this layer on, and I'm going to just grab the lasso tool. I'm going to use the freeform lasso tool. I'm going to grab this guy. Looks up here, looks kind of interesting. Maybe I'll just grab him. And I'm just going to copy and then go back over to this layer here and hide out of the layer and then paste him. And now he's floating around in his own layer, so I can kind of move him around and say like, all right, maybe he kind of fits in there somewhere. Maybe I'll make him a little smaller. Control T to make him a little smaller. And I'll kind of drop that stone right in there. So I still have some work to do on that to make him blend a little bit better, but that's covered up that like really bright stone. And that little sharp edge is also kind of bothering me too. So I can go back to the clone stamp tool anytime I want. So just do this manually, and I can click over here and just like, no, gotta make sure I'm, you know what I'm gonna do? I like this. I'm just gonna select both of these, right click, and just say merge these layers. So I'm just gonna squash those two. So now that one's not free floating, but it'll make it easier for me to just come in here and kind of paint right on top of that. I don't have to worry about what layer I'm on. I'm kind of just knocking that little sharp edge down a little bit. And any place that's bugging you, you can just come in and kind of do this little sort of a fun process here, and maybe blend, you know, this stone here. Be careful when you're working right on the edge though, because you could be building a new, if you put your stamp right up across the top here, you could be creating a new seam. So you always want to give yourself a little bit of gap away from the seam there, and just kind of move around. You get the idea here. I'm not going to do too much more fussing here. There's clearly some places that need a little bit more attention, but that's the right idea. So now, actually this spot right here is pretty bad. Let me just pop that in. That's close enough. There's clearly some spots that you want to spend some more time in. But now what I can do is just go ahead and go back to the offset. And you can see I can even kind of test it. I can sort of move the edge around a little bit. And it's like, well, it's a lot harder. You know, I guess if we look, because we didn't really do a good job on this. If I looked really closely, I could probably figure out where the seam was in there. But it's like, even at first glance right now, I can't quite figure out what the seam, where the seam is. So one thing that we can do now that we're happy with that is I might want to say, I want to adjust these layers a little bit, the colors of this. So that brings us down to this little button down over here in the lower corner here, this little kind of like half moon button. If you go ahead and click on that, you get a whole bunch of adjustment layers. These are called adjustment layers. And you can come in and say, let's just do an easy one. We'll just do brightness and contrast over here so you can see how this works. So I can click on brightness and contrast, and it's just giving me a layer on top of this one that will affect the layers below it. Or if I click on this little button right there, it will only affect the layer directly below it. So what I could do is I could say, you know what, I'm just going to maybe like play around with it a little bit darker. No, maybe it needs to be a little bit brighter. I can do whatever I want with these little faders here. I could saturate them. I could, you know, push the greens and lower the yellows or whatever. So I'm just going to do this. Here I'm going to make a real obvious one. I'm going to kind of blow this way out over here so you can see what this next step is. And you notice there's this little white window over here, and it's actually selected. You can see those little bars around it there tell us that that's what we're actually painting on. This is going to make us paint in black and white. So I'm just going to come over here and grab the brush tool, or B will hit the brush tool. And when I paint on here with black, what I'm actually doing is painting on this mask, and you can see it starting to appear over here. And if you alt click on that, you can see just the mask alone if you ever want to work on that way. But I'm going to alt click on that again to bring it back. And what I'm doing, make my brush a little bit bigger here. I'm going to come over here and just sort of maybe paint in areas that I want to be a little darker. Like if there's a spot in my image that's like a little too bright or a little too saturated or whatever. I'm actually not going to keep this, but I'm just showing you how this works because I think the actual photograph looks fine. But you can go in here and control just, you know, the amount of black that you have in the mask. You can say like, that's nothing. This is giving me no, this is probably 100% black. If I click over here on the, just to look at it and say, yep, that's 100% black on the mask, so there's no effect. So it doesn't matter how much I run this slider over here, you can see that that area is being excluded from that. So that, you know, these look really weird and extreme, but you might want to do that in a little area where you're just tweaking the colors a little bit. And then if you don't like it, you can always just throw it away, drag it over here to the trash. We can do another one. Maybe we'll just play around with the exposure a little bit. And exposure is another one where you can just kind of beef up this the sharpness of the shadows a little bit. You can also make it a little bit brighter. That kind of sometimes can really break. Yeah, see how it brings out the colors? It's a little less kind of flat looking. You can always double check by, like, see how that's got a little bit of a kind of a gray muddiness to it. That's just a little more poppy, So maybe I'll keep that one. You can always just leave these on here, or you can come and just flatten them. If you just merge visible or whatever, that'll work as well. But I think this is going to be good enough for what we want to do. So I'm going to go over here, and now we need to save, in the current version, we have to save a copy unless we want to save it as a Photoshop or whatever. So we're going to say save a copy because we are going to want to go up here to the desktop. I'm going to want to save this. We'll just save copy. We'll just call it that, save copy. And I'm going to come down here and, actually I'm going to make it a JPEG because there's no alpha necessary here. We don't need the alpha. I'm going to go ahead and just save it. JPEG is going to be a little bit smaller. I've got my little window over here. Great. Now I'm good to go. Let's jump back into Blender and we'll take a look at, I'm just going to hide the paving stones here. I'll just hide them. They're still there, but I'm going to say Shift A to add, and we're going to add an image as plane. I'm in object mode, Shift A to add, image as plane, and then it's going to say, well, what image do you want? Oh, I need to go to the desktop, and I'm going to say save copy. There's our little image there. You can do a lot of this next couple of steps over here too, but I want to do them in the editor so you can actually see what they're doing. So there's our image. Now, if you don't see that, if it looks like this or gray, I have mine set to do random colors. So, but if yours is gray or you don't see anything, you need to make sure that you're in the viewport shading mode or you're at least in the lit mode. That's going to be like the final rendered lit mode. But viewport shading is the look dev mode. That's probably the best one to be in right now before you've messed with your lights and all. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and rotate this. See, there's the red axis right over here. I want to lay this flat down. So I'm going to say, with this selected, I'm going to hit R, and then X to let it know I only want to spin it in the red axis, and then 90 to flip it around flat. So actually, looks like maybe I should have got -90 in there. Doesn't really matter, but it would for normal maps and things. So R, X, -90. There we go. And now we've got this guy lying flat there on the ground. We can also change the scale of it. So we can change this to scale right now if we want. We can say scale and then just 2 and enter, and that's going to make it a little bit bigger. So instead of being a 1 meter by 1 meter, it's now 2 meter by 2 meter. That's a little bit bigger. We can do that if you want, or you can make it smaller, whatever you think, whatever you need. And then if you wanted to create that array effect, if you want to do like a long hallway with your texture the way I did, you're going to want to come over here to this like modifier properties, the little blue wrench, and then add a modifier. And there's a whole bunch of them in here, but the one you're after is right at the top, generate array, and then it's going to automatically give you one direction. Unfortunately, you can only go in one direction at a time with these. So you can see that, again, red is the X. So over here it says X is 1 over there. I'm going to add another one if I want to go in the other direction. I'm going to add another array down over here, and this time I'm going to set the X to 0 and the Y in this case to 1. And by 1 it's going just one full step. If I make this higher than 1, there'll be a gap, right? Or if I make this less than 1, there'll be an overlap. So you want to keep that 1, or whatever, maybe you're spacing out columns or something and you do want a gap. You don't want it to be 1 to 1, but we do for our floor. And then however many we want, we can kind of go off into infinity over here, making our hallway or our pavers or whatever, go as big as we want. But do take a look here. I am looking through the camera here. Let's just hit F12 to render it real quick. So that looks pretty good on our ground there, certainly for our needs. I don't see any huge spots that are really bugging me, even though the tile pattern, we're seeing that little weed, and there it is again, But what you also want to do is kind of break this up in your render. Maybe there's a little prop that goes here, or a little piece of wall, or, you're probably not looking at a giant infinite plane of patio, in your scene. You've probably got other things that can help break up the floor a little bit, so that scene isn't so perfect. So I want to show you one last other one before we go, just to see how you can apply this to something a little bit more simple. I'm going to go over here and say open on this, and I'm going to find this wood fence here. So this actually turned out really well. I found this one. Yeah, is that the one I used? Let me open up my other one and see if I recognize the other one better. I guess there's sort of 6 in 1, so I'll grab this first one here. Now what I'm going to do is just use the crop tool, and I know I'm not going to want this like bleached out bit over here, so I'm going to just move the crop tool and make it square. And that's good enough. I'll just start with that. Now you can see I've got a little issue going on here with the fact that the shot's a little keystoned, and I'd like this to be perfectly vertical. So I'm going to say Control A to select everything, Control T for the transform tools, and I can just do this manually. If I want to just grab a corner here, that's going to scale it. But if I hold down the Control key, I can manually grab a corner, and I can sort of do both of them by hand. That's usually what I do because I don't want to go into the menu here. But there's even a different way to do that. Let me just undo back and show you that you can go to transform, and then in this case we want perspective. We want perspective, and then I think if you grab the handle down there, you can see that it's doing it in both directions. So I usually don't use perspective. Because usually it's crooked in more than one axis. So I'm just going to come down here and just hold the control key, and I'm just looking to see, is that nice and straight? You can come over here and click and drag out a ruler if you want. You know, if you want to give yourself a little guide, that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to go over to the other side. Oh, I'm still using the scale mode here. I've got to just tell it that I'm done with that. Let me try that again. So select A, Control T, and now I'm going to just go like that. And I'm just going to bring this guy over here like that. And that's probably not perfectly straight, but maybe it's good enough for what we need. Whoop, there we go. And then that's really kind of all I do. Oh, no, there's something I wanted you to see in this. To make this tileable, you can do this in a different, you can use other tools for this. You'll see what I mean. See how the bottom's a lot darker than the top is over there? So I'm going to say cancel that. In fact, I'm also going to scale down my image here, image size. We're just going to make this 1,000 by 1,000. Oh, no, that's what I wanted. Shoot. I had it turned off already. 1,000 by 1,000. So pretty small, but all we need for this. Okay, nice and tidy. Okay, so there's that. And then what I'm going to do now in this is I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to create a brightness contrast layer over here. Remember, in our mask, we don't have to just paint things out. We can also use things like the gradient tool over here. So if I do the gradient tool, I think if I go, I'm going from under basics here, I'm just using a black to white. So I'm just going black to white. I'm going to go from the bottom. I'm going to click and I'm going to go straight up. I think it's this direction. Let's see. I'll find out if it's not. Now when I come over here into the brightness, I can brighten up. Oh, I got it upside down. So let me just, usually there's an invert in here, but yeah, there we go. Invert the mask. So I just inverted the mask to go the direction I should have clicked in the other way. It might be a little too bright. Maybe that looks about right. That looks pretty good. Now the only trouble with this is in order to check, you have to undo if it's wrong. So I'm going to grab them both here. I'm going to say just merge layers, and now I'm going to do the offset, other offset again. And yeah, that's a lot closer. You can see that in value. We don't have it quite so dark. I probably could go a little bit more than that, but that's good enough for now. Now what I'm going to do is come back in here with the patch tool, and I'm just going to go along. In fact, I can even kind of do multiple ones at the same time. I can just go up here. As long as I keep the seams straight, then I can kind of like blur these edges. Oh, this one right here, I might want to do some more special work in here. And the reason why is I'm looking at these grains. I'm going to come in here and do a little bit of this by hand because, there we go. And just going to grab this because I just want to carry these like grain lines down here a little bit more into that. Nothing says, you know, oftentimes I'll come in here and I'll say like, I'm going to carry this like paler color up here a little farther. Ooh, I don't want to replace that knot though, because that's going to look weird. I can take this guy and I can sort of paint this down in here a little bit. I can come in and like, grab that. Oops, I missed. Make that nice and straight. There we go. Anyway, so I got more to do with this, but you get the idea that you can use those various tools. You can either just kind of clone stamp tools. I might even just like take some of this out of here because this is kind of a little too distinctive looking. You know, you don't want areas that are too easily identifiable in a repeatable texture. Okay, I'm making a mess, but you get the idea. So good enough for what we're doing now. Well, it's not good enough at all, but you know, you don't need to watch me fix this. You get the idea. I'm going to go ahead and save that as a, we'll call this wood 2. And I'll show you wood 1 where I actually took a little bit more time into it. You can also like apply these to a material as well. If you create an images plane, you're actually creating a material at the same time. So if I just bring in images plane and I bring in woods, oops, I'm on the, there we go. I went wood 2. There we go. There's our kind of lousy wood texture there. But again, it doesn't look too bad. But now that I've got it in the scene, I can actually go in here and say, you know, go and give me a cube back in here. Mesh and cube. And then it's a very big cube. So I'm going to jump in and tab and scale it down inside edit mode there. And I'll just scale on the X here and make kind of a post or something. Whoops. What is happening here? It's snapping to something weird. There we go. And then that's good enough. We'll go with that. Probably wants to be a little bit taller, but we'll go with that just to make things move along. And then what I can do is come over here and I'll exit edit mode here. I can come over here to the material, and that material here, wood 2, is here. So if I go ahead and click on wood 2, now it's not wrapping properly to this, but we can fix that quite easily. If I hit the tab key and enter edit mode in here, I've got everything selected, and I'm going to say U, and I'm just going to, we'll just smart UV project. We'll just do it that way. That's a kind of a way that is not ideal for what we're doing here, but it'll work nicely. Jump back into the camera. And I will get out of that. You can see, okay, well now I've got that. Oops, things in my way here. Let's just fly around with the camera. And we can take a look at, see now that it's mapped it nicely to the 4 sides on there. So, oh, we are getting that little transparent thing there. Let's fix that as well. Something I forgot to mention here when you're bringing in materials into Blender is we want to grab this material, come over here, you need to be Eevee for this for some reason, scroll down over here to the very bottom and you're going to see settings and it's set to alpha blend by default. We just want to make this opaque and you can see now the wood is solid. So make that opaque down under here under settings. You can also change the roughness. You can make the roughness from half rough to 100% rough if things look a little too glossy. But now we can kind of look at our scene here. I'll just render it out. We can see our little, oh, it's pretty far over there in the corner. Let me grab this panel over here. I'll raise it up, get it a little bit more centered. I'll move this little post a little more centered, something like that. We'll render that again. And we can see there's our wood material on the scene. There's our floor material. We can do something really quick with just dropping in these materials. And then if you want, I'll show you in the next video here how to actually like cut these up and use the knife tool and the loop select tool and actually take an image as this plane option and give it some more depth. But it actually looks pretty good for something that just a couple of pictures that I took in my backyard. My post is floating a little bit here. And something we didn't even unwrap. We just literally just dropped these in as images as planes. And you can see if we took a little bit more time here, these would look amazing.